Hey, listen, before I tell you my tale, tell me yours in the comments. How did you get into tabletop RPGs? And now, listen as I tell a tale of fate and destiny. It was a cold winter's day as young KYLIE sat at the table. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if it was actually cold. I don't remember that much detail. But a community member recently asked me how I got into D&D. That led to me thinking really hard because I honestly couldn't remember. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, well, I do remember. And it's kind of weird. So I thought I would share my story with you guys. My first introduction to tabletop RPGs was actually from my mother. I was probably 12, 13. I was in middle school at the time, at the very least. And I distinctly remember my mother escaping, the household of 3 preteen girls on a regular basis to go play this thing called D&D. At the time, I remember thinking, it's just some lame thing that adults play. It was just some lame adult get together. What did it matter? So I didn't have any interest at all. However, I did really love the books. At the time, I believe they were playing 3 or 3.5, and she had the monster manual. And I remember thumbing through that thing in awe of all of the artwork and then trying to figure out what the stats meant. I don't know if maybe the book was calling out to me, to my dungeon master soul, like use these in your next thing. Regardless, I definitely feel like it was trying to sink its teeth into me at that point, but it didn't. And I still just assumed it was some sort of lame thing that my parents did. My mother and actually my grandfather in particular, they were also the first people to introduce gaming in general to my life, starting with like PC games, but then extending into console systems. And I do remember that my mom had pretty much every Baldur's Gate game, including things like Neverwinter, Icewind Dale, and obviously Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. We even bought some Baldur's Gate games for the Xbox and things like that. And so I was really into those games, and I played the hell out of Icewind Dale, although I was young. I didn't fully understand what I was doing, and I got stuck early on a lot, so I never really got very far. Most of the time my entire party died. There's like some sort of Yeti somewhere, and I didn't know you had to use fire to take care of him. I still very much loved those games, but it didn't really connect to me that was the same game that my mom had played when I was younger. It wasn't until college and a friend of my then boyfriend, now husband, reached out to us and was like, I want to try running a D&D game. Would you guys be interested? And me, being me, immediately was like, I'm an old lame adult now, thinking that this game was something that only old lame adults played. But I was like, you know what? I'm interested. We may as well give it a go. That was a cold winter's day for the game. We ended up staying like a whole weekend there at their house, and it was super fun. We only played a handful of sessions, and at the time we were playing 3.5, which was fine, but it was way more complicated, and we had a little bit of a hard time with scheduling to begin with. So then there were long periods between each game, so I really never fully understood the rules of 3.5, and unfortunately, with all of our schedules and the distance, the campaign itself fizzled out. A few years later, D&D tried to convert me again. I was definitely out of college by this point. I had actually recently been introduced to Critical Role. I had a coworker who was super into Critical Role. She was glowing about how the first campaign had ended and how they were starting their new campaign, and she was always talking about it. So I was like, well, I can multitask. So I started listening to that while I was working and pretty quickly caught up to where they were. At the same time, when our friend who tried to run 3.5 had moved back to PA and reached out to us to play again, I was like, well, now that I kind of understand the game a little better, at least I understand 5th edition a little bit better since I've been listening to this podcast for a while, yeah, let's give it another go. We ended up switching to 5th edition, which was subsequently more just easier, which is one of the things I think helped D&D take off. Not only were there things like Critical Role and Stranger Things shining light on it, it was also a little bit easier. This time it was slightly more successful, but then a lot of things happened both in our mutual friend's life, our DM's life, and he was unfortunately not able to keep up with the game. By this point, D&D had her claws in me, and the love of the game and of course the click-clacks had a hold of me. And from there, I actually ended up starting to run my own games. So this was probably 2018, 2019. It was a little bit before COVID. And that's when I started making my own D&D notebooks because I was like, wow, being a DM is much harder than just being a player. And I need to keep track of all this other stuff. So then, of course, I started selling those on top of working 3 other jobs, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's crazy, but the rest is pretty much history. I hope you enjoyed my story. Now, tell me your story. I would love to hear how you got involved with tabletop games. What was your first introduction? I feel like most people, especially nowadays, it's like 5th edition or D&D. I know that there are people who get introduced to tabletop games through things like Vampire the Masquerade or Call of Cthulhu, and I'm just interested to know. So share your story with me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.